Ladies and gentlemen, thank you.
Listen to Pavarotti.
Can I be your superhero?
Hello, welcome to The Revealing. I am your host, Pavarotti, and I'm here to discuss the Idaho 4 case. Now, this is part 2 of a video that I'm trying to make my definitive video on what I believe happened at the crime scene. Now, in doing that, I know it's really difficult to even watch the factual evidence that should have been taken into consideration on all the things around this crime. Because for so long, we have tore everything apart. We've discovered lies. We've discovered half-truths. We've suspected a lot of things. And a lot of us have been through the ringer, especially with the roommates, what happened after the atrocity, to the 911 call, lies, lies, lies. So it's very hard to discern fact from fiction at this point. But I'm going to ask you just to keep an open mind, because a lot of the distractions that we've had for years is due to information that was not provided to us. It was due to half-truths. It was due to almost nothing. And then when we finally get the information, our minds are so bombarded with all of the stuff that we've thought and we've heard and we thought was real and we didn't know, that it's really difficult to reframe your mindset and go back and really look at the evidence objectively. And that's just what I try to do. And when we're talking about the actual crime here, the actual atrocity, what I'm trying to do with this particular video is take out all the preconceived notions. Take them all out. Taking out the motive, take out who's responsible, who pulled this off, the players involved. I'm trying to take it all out and just focus on actual factual evidence. Just like the investigators would have had to do when they tried to assess this situation. And I can see what they tried to do when they tried to assess this situation. And I believe some of their assertions to a degree. But then I also believe that they knew what they were saying could not have happened. And then they tried to manipulate the evidence around what they wanted the narrative to be. And here's the thing that you've got to keep in mind. We have tore this thing apart since the beginning, since they arrested Brian Kohberger and charged him with the crime. We've tore it apart from the perspective that one person went in and did this. That's still in your mind right now. Even though you know more than one person committed this crime, you still look at the evidence, I assure you, in the mind frame of one person committed the crime. What do I mean by that? Well, a crime like this would be loud. There would be many screams. Everybody in the house would have heard everything. And that, I would say, is true. If the crime was committed by one person, or even two, possibly even three, that's where we've got to change our mindset. Because as I'm going to show you throughout this evidence, in my humble opinion, it is quite impossible for this crime to be committed by one, or even two. And much to my chagrin, as much as I tried to make it work, it's impossible for this crime to have taken place with the evidence that we now have with even three. Had to have 4 assailants. Absolutely. 100% had to have 4 assailants, as I'm going to attempt to prove to you with the actual factual evidence. So with that in mind, then you have to rethink everything that you've thought up until this point. For example, how loud of an event would this have been if there were 4 assailants? And when I'm done, you'll see how I believe this thing went down. And you'll see that it's not going to be quite as loud as you may have thought at one time. For example, I'm going to go ahead and lay it out, okay? We have gone through and I found the documentation that lets us know that for a fact, the sliding door on the third floor in Kaylee's room was in fact unlocked. So no qualm about that. It was unlocked. What I propose that the evidence shows is that 4 assailants ascended on the King Road house between 4 and 4:16 a.m. One of the assailants, with a simple cusp of the hand and a foot in hand, was lifted up to the third floor balcony. And they waited at the back slider on the third floor that goes into Kaylee's room. 2 more assailants went to the rear slider on the second floor, and another assailant went to the first floor. We'll talk about how they gained entry here in just a little bit. The first assailant went through Kaylee's door, through the hallway to Maddie's room. Now, if Kaylee is in her room with Murphy and an assailant comes through the door, Murphy is going to start barking. Kaylee's going to start screaming. It would have woke up Maddie. There would have been chaos ensuing. However, if Kaylee, just like Dylan says, is in the living room playing with Murphy, that leaves her room wide open for an assailant to come through that door, walk through the hall, go into Maddie's room, who Maddie's in bed, and he attacks Maddie. Now, how can he do that without making any noise? Well, up until this point, we've all thought that Maddie and Kaylee were in the bed together. Therefore, when one assailant attacks Maddie, Kaylee's going to wake up and make a lot of noise. And you have one assailant trying to subdue 2 different victims. Well, take Kaylee out of the picture. She's now downstairs in the living room with Murphy. That one assailant goes into Maddie's room, and with a simple putting his hand over Maddie's mouth as he attacks her, now that attack becomes fairly silent. What happens next? Well, first of all, if Kaylee's in the living room with Murphy, the state's case of, and this is why they couldn't put Kaylee in the living room with Murphy. This is why they had to put her upstairs. Because that means if Kaylee's in the living room with Murphy, then their one-off assailant that comes through the rear slider in the kitchen, well, you see, he has to open that sliding door. He has to sneak past somehow Kaylee in the living room to go upstairs to Maddie. Not only would that take nerves of steel, but it would likely, startle Kaylee to see somebody walking through the kitchen and going upstairs. And even if he was able to slip past her without her seeing, the rear slider has to be left open at this point because law enforcement knows that Murphy ran out the back sliding door and started barking. He didn't open the door for Murphy to run out. That back slider was open for Murphy to run out. So if the assailant came through the rear slider in the kitchen and somehow made it past Kaylee, he still would have had to left the back slider open for Murphy to get out. And guess what? It was a really cold night. That's only a few feet from that back slider to that living room. If Kaylee was in the living room, that cold air would have come through there and it would have slapped Kaylee, and she would have known it really fast, and she would have known that back slider was open, and she likely would have walked in that kitchen and she would have shut it. Even if that was the scenario, she'd have shut it before she went upstairs. Murphy couldn't go out. That's why every little piece of evidence in this thing is key. Nobody came through that back slider while Kaylee and Murphy was in the living room, but that's why law enforcement had to put them upstairs, because they thought this through as well. But if we have one assailant upstairs attacking Maddie, he's doing it now and he's muffling the sounds because he has full control of Maddie. Kaylee then walks up the stairs, just like Dylan says, with Murphy. When she reaches the top of the stairs, she either hears something going on in Maddie's room or she sees something. The assailant then chases Kaylee back downstairs, just like Dylan says. As this is happening, Dylan says, Kaylee screamed, "There's someone here." The people out the back slider would have known the situation was escalating at this point. They would then come through that back slider. Xana would have heard, because she's awake, we know this. She would have heard Kaylee scream as well, "There's someone here," and take off running. Xana comes out of the bedroom, makes it all the way to the bar cart before the two assailants that run through that back slider at this point. One of them attacks Xana. Again, I believe it's a female because Xana is able to fight her off. The forensics show she was attacked at the bar cart and then continued to be attacked all the way back into the bedroom. And 50 strikes means that person that was embattled with Xana could not go and attack Ethan. That means that two assailants came through that rear slider at the same time. One attacked Xana. The other runs in Xana's bedroom where Ethan's on the bed before he has a chance to react. And he attacks Ethan and dispels Ethan rather fast. And I believe that's why you hear those muffled screams, just like law enforcement said on the 1112 camera, right before and after the loud thud. While this is taking place, Kaylee has tried to run straight down to those stairs to get to the bottom floor. The assailant that she's seen attacking Maddie is chasing her at this point. When she makes it to those stairs, you have to account for the witness on the first floor statement. She's seen a spark and heard a bang. When Kaylee got to those stairs, there was an assailant at the bottom of those stairs. The only way that Bethany could have seen a spark and heard a bang is if that person was on the first floor. He sees Kaylee running down. He fires. I don't know if he shot Kaylee or not. He may have just fired in the air. He may have fired in the floor. I don't know, just to get her to stop. But I know that the person that attacked Maddie that was chasing Kaylee caught Kaylee right there because he attacked her. And that's why there are 12 blood stains, 12 cast-off stains in that spot. And 3 of them are 90% Kaylee cross-contaminated with 10% Maddie, because the same person that attacked Maddie upstairs attacks Kaylee right there. I believe as he's attacking Kaylee, the person that was at the bottom of the stairs goes up the stairs with the butt of that gun and hits Kaylee. And that's why Kaylee doesn't get anybody's DNA under her fingernails. He hits Kaylee in the face with the butt of that gun. That's why Kaylee has stripes on both sides of her mouth, and she was attacked with a blunt force weapon. This attack with 4 individuals, which all of the evidence lines up perfectly with this scenario, but it would have happened fast. There wouldn't have been a lot of noise. There'd have been some. There'd been enough for Dylan and Bethany to hear it, obviously. At that point, they carry Kaylee back up, put her in bed with Maddie for whatever reason. Experienced criminals sometimes will stage the crime scene just to throw off investigators. I don't believe that they sit there and they cleaned up blood. I think somebody else did that, but I'll leave that for another day because that's my speculation. It was also the speculation of the defense expert, though. And there's a lot to that part. But that would account for why there was less noise that you would expect to hear. All of the forensics that you would have expected to find. And here's the key. All those forensics, they didn't have until after they arrested Brian Kohberger. They had a few, but they certainly didn't have them all. And the forensics tell the story in this case. What about Murphy, you say, Pavarotti? Murphy, as Kaylee's running down the stairs, we hear it on the 1112 camera. There's a loud thud. That's obviously a gunshot. There's about 5 or 6 seconds before you hear Murphy barking. At the sound of that thud, Murphy hightailed it out that back door. Took about 5 or 6 seconds. I'm sure Murphy was barking from that point till he got out the back door. Once he gets out the back door and he feels like he's in open air, then he begins barking, and he keeps on barking for 30 minutes. Now, I agree with Lana. I think there are several dogs barking at that point. But let me ask you, for those of you that have dogs that lived in a neighborhood before, if you have one dog that goes out and starts barking, what do all the other dogs in the neighborhood do? They bark along with them. One dog barks, it starts a chain reaction. So yes, I believe more than one dog was out there that was barking, but I believe Murphy absolutely initiated it, and he initiated it right then, because all the evidence lines up when you take the actual factual evidence and you put it together. The only thing that doesn't line up is one assailant, two assailant, three assailants. You have to have the proper number of assailants to commit the crime, and once you have that, you have everything lining up to a T. I'm going to go ahead and restart this video. If you've already seen the first half of this, go ahead and skip. I'll put the I don't know it offhand, but I'll put the time on the page here for you to skip to. This is part 2. Now I'm going to attempt to prove through all that evidence everything that I just said. And if you haven't watched the first one with an open mind, after everything I just said, you might want to give it a shot. You're a superhero. The only way to truly solve a crime is to take all the available relevant evidence into consideration, and it must all work based on the relevant evidence. We're going to go through and we're going to identify all of the relevant evidence that has to be accounted for this crime to happen. We're going to start with statements from the only witness in the entire case, Dylan Mortensen, and what she has to say about Kaylee and Murphy. We're going to see that it's consistent across interviews. We're going to discuss the loud thud heard at 417 on the 1112 camera. And yes, it can absolutely be taken into account because it's relevant to the events that happened around the crime. Noises at 226 are irrelevant. We're going to talk about Murphy barking starting at 417 as well, because once again, it is very relevant to the times of the crime. Then Bethany's statement about hearing firecrackers and sparks, followed by her call to Dylan at 419 and 7 seconds to say that she had heard something, followed by Dylan's call back to Bethany at 420 and 20 seconds and says she saw a man in a mask. All very relevant to the circumstances, as I'm going to show you. But everything must be taken into account. The forensic results of the crime scene must be taken into account. The injuries to the victims must be taken into account as well. The fact that we now know that there was likely post-mortem wounds on Kaylee must be taken into account. And then finally, the weapons that were used in the attack must be taken into account. And I will first account for all of the relevant evidence that I just discussed so that we truly have an understanding of what took place on King Road. But more importantly, we're going to take all of the relevant evidence, line it up with the theories in the case by the professionals. And we know that the defense expert, even though we have limited information of his actual theory of events, we know through the release of court documents at least some of his findings. And this is Dr. Brent Turvey, who is a PhD criminal profiler, forensic criminologist, and crime scene analyst, crime scene recreation expert. And we can see in one of the filings that the judge, when he ordered on vague and undisclosed expert testimony as related to the prosecution's expert, Darren Gilbertson, the Idaho State Police lead detective, and you can see that he was referring to opinions from Brent Turvey that more than one assailant was necessary to accomplish the crime in the time frame alleged. Specifically, he asserts that there is direct and indirect evidence that attempts were made by the suspect or suspects to clean up the crime scene after the unalivings, which would have taken far longer than the time interval alleged by the state. And what you can take from that is it would have taken much longer than the time interval alleged by the state if one suspect committed this crime. He also goes on to say there were multiple weapons used against Kaylee Gonzalez. Not it looks like, not it seems like, no, it's a statement. There were multiple weapons used against Kaylee Gonzalez. And that is later confirmed by both the prosecutor in the case and the detectives. And Xana and Ethan appeared to have been attacked at the same time. So as we go through the evidence in this case, we're going to see, does his opinion of the recreation of the crime match up to the evidence, or does the state's case match up? Or is any of the evidence proved to be untrue or irrelevant based on the actual evidence? What I'm going to show is all the evidence that we're going to gather is factual evidence that can be verified and corroborated by other evidence. And when we get to the end, I think it's going to show you the truth, and the truth is shocking. It also says in other filings, while Dr. Turvey does not specifically state in his report that one assailant could not have accomplished the unalivings in the short time frame alleged by the state, he infers as much through his opinion that there was evidence of cleanup efforts at the crime scene, which would have taken a significantly longer period of time. The second time that the judge has mentioned the fact that there was evidence of cleanup efforts at the crime scene. And then it goes on to say, Mr. Turvey has opined in his report that 2 assailants were involved in the unaliving, partially because he believes multiple weapons were used against Kaylee Gonzalez. Inferred in this opinion is that one person would not have had the time or the ability to use multiple weapons in the time frame alleged when faced with 2 victims. And again, this is the judge opining that 2 assailants were involved specifically against Kaylee and more than likely Maddie. I think what we're going to find is 2 assailants don't meet the evidence either, but multiple assailants do. But this is the defense expert and what he has opined from studying the crime scene and all the evidence available. Now, the POV man has determined that 4 assailants are necessary to carry out the crime in the most likely time frame that the crime happened based on all the available evidence. But then we've got the state, right? Darren Gilbertson. He believes 1 assailant carried out the entire crime. We're going to check it against the evidence. And his opinion will be that depending on the suspect's pace and route, he could have carried out the crimes in approximately 2 to 4 minutes. Is that right, Mr. Gilbertson? So we have the report of the timed runs that he attached to his disclosure and what he did to determine if this was even possible. And what we're going to show is the state does not take into account any of the actual factual evidence when making this determination by Gilbertson here. But we're also going to show where the state had to alter a lot of the evidence just to make the story even plausible. But those are the opinions by the experts and what the evidence will show. And we're going to line up all those opinions with the evidence to see what's true. We're going to start with Dylan's statement and what is remarkably consistent across it and what clues we must take from the only witness in the case.
Well, I first noticed Kaylee go upstairs and scream and run downstairs.
So 4 this morning, Kaylee went upstairs.
Yeah.
To the way top.
Yes, to her room. With Murphy, the dog.
Okay.
And then
you heard Kaylee scream?
I heard her scream and run as fast as she could downstairs. And she said, someone's here.
She ran downstairs?
Yes, I can hear it. You can hear everything. And I heard her run downstairs really fast. And then I heard Murphy barking a lot.
Okay.
And then I heard her going to I think it was the bathroom, and I remember her sobbing, And I just remember hearing this guy's voice and I didn't recognize saying, "You're gonna be okay, I'm gonna help you." Murphy was with Kaylee when they were like dancing. They walked upstairs, he was still with her. And then when she yelled, "Someone's here," he started barking in the house. And then I believe the slider door was open and I think he went out that way because I could tell like the sound of his barking was getting like more distant. I'm usually the one that locks the sliding door at night because Xana and Ethan would get up and forget to lock it. I don't know if I locked it that night. I don't believe I locked it. So I remember waking up around 4 to 4:20.
So you awakened at somewhere between 4 and 4:28.
Around 4 to 4:20. Woke up out of nowhere. I heard her playing music.
How do you know it was her? I guess I should ask that.
It's because I heard her voice and she's probably singing. I knew for sure it was her when she walked upstairs and she said, "Someone's here." That's how I knew for sure that it was Kaylee. She like walked up the stairs, normal, wasn't weird or anything.
So she like shouted out to you, "Somebody's here"?
Not to me. I don't know if she knew I was awake, but so she walked up the stairs with Murphy. I think she got to almost about the top of the stairs just by how many like stomps there was. And she said someone was here frantically. From what I remember, I think she like ran down the stairs pretty fast and then it just stopped.
Did Kaylee sound stressed?
Yes.
What was Murphy doing? Was he barking?
Audio.
I think he was barking.
What normally, under normal circumstances, would make Murphy bark?
He just wasn't really much of a barker.
But you heard him barking, you think? Or
Yeah, I think so. But I do think I think I remember hearing barking when Kaylee said that. And I just like something about her like running down the stairs really fast because of how like fast she was stomping.
you could hear that.
Yeah.
What's Kaylee saying?
She just said someone's here and then nothing else.
But it sounded like you said you heard her say someone's here, then heard the frantic.
Yes.
So
like she walked.
She was wearing shoes or not wearing shoes.
I think she was wearing because all the girls like wear those Doc Martens, whatever. I think it was those.
So you never left your room?
I opened the door, and I do remember like looking up the stairs and then looking to the side, and I could kind of see the living room, but not fully. And I just remember like seeing nothing. So I slept the door and locked it because I was freaking out. Like I didn't know if there was a guy there. I opened the door again. What I heard was someone was crying in the bathroom, and I think it was Kaylee.
Which bathroom?
The one me and Xana share on the second floor.
So the second time you opened your door?
Yes. After like the crying, I think I heard someone, like this guy's voice I had never heard in my life, just saying like, "No, like it's okay, I'm gonna help you." But it wasn't in this nice way, like it was a weird, creepy way. I think I called out for Kaylee and Xana because it was the second floor, and I was just like, "Kaylee, Xana." And so if someone was there, they would have heard me.
So when you heard his voice, where would he have been when you heard it?
I think the bathroom. It just seemed too distant from the living room. I think in my mind just suggested, okay, bathroom. I think it's bathroom.
And what was it again? He said, "I'm sorry."
He said, "No." He said, "It's okay. I'm going to help you."
Was it directed at you?
No. What he was saying that to was whoever was crying in the bathroom. It was a male voice.
And what did you think? What were you thinking at this time?
Like, who is that? Like, are they talking to the girl crying? Like,
And you thought the girl might be Kaylee.
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
But you're only thinking that because of the position of the bathroom in their bedrooms, but you don't know that it's Kaylee.
Yeah, I have no idea if it's Kaylee. At that moment, what I thought was it was Kaylee. Now, after hearing more stuff and thinking more, it could have been Xana. But from that moment, I thought it was Kaylee.
It's more important. That's what I was going to tell you. It's more important because I know you've talked to, sounds like from Dustin's interview.
Yeah.
Don't allow, if you can't, that information to influence what you knew at the time that we're asking you these things were happening, because we're trying to figure out who did this, and we can't have those influences drive our, we're trying to.
So like at that moment,
you thought it was Kaylee.
I thought it was Kaylee. I totally thought it was Kaylee.
Had you ever heard that male voice before?
No, I've never heard that in my entire life. It was not Ethan's voice whatsoever. I know Ethan's voice, and it was not Ethan's voice at all.
And the tone of the voice, what did it sound like?
A sorry but like creepy tone, but it wasn't like, "It's okay, I'm gonna help you." It was like, "No, like it's okay, I'm gonna help you."
When you opened the door the first time to look up and down the hallway and up the stairs, was Murphy barking?
No.
Do you remember if Murphy was barking?
I don't think so. I think he was only barking when Kitty said something, and then I think he left the house. Like I like, you know when sounds get more distant and you can hear them getting more distant? That's what I thought I heard, and I think he went out of the house, like out the back door.
The consistent statement she made gives us these clues that must be accounted for. And some of these statements, especially as it relates to Murphy, have to be accounted for, because at this time there is no way that the investigators would have even known anything about Murphy and his barking caught on the 1112 camera or the thuds. So as you go through her statement about what happened with Murphy, it absolutely coincides perfectly with Murphy barking and the thuds. It's very relevant. But the clues we have to account for is, she says between 4 and 4:20, clearly. She says Kaylee is in the living room with Murphy in all three statements. All three statements. Kaylee goes upstairs with Murphy, screams, "There's someone here." All three statements. Kaylee runs back downstairs and Murphy starts barking. In two of the three statements, she says Murphy goes out the slider and continues barking. All three statements, she hears Kaylee continuing to cry. She says she thinks she's in the bathroom, but she's determining that based on the distance from her room. It could very easily be the stairs. And she hears a voice of a man that she doesn't know saying, not a nice way, "It's okay, I'm going to help you." These statements are very consistent, and they are very consistent with the facts around all the other evidence in this case, as I'm going to show you. But all of these clues must be accounted for if you're going to do a proper investigation and solve this case. But here's where you have to keep an open mind to Dylan's statements, because if you don't, you miss the sleight of hand that the state tried to pull with this evidence. Here is what the state alleged in the probable cause affidavit. That Dylan stated she originally went to sleep in her bedroom on the southeast side of the second floor. Dylan stated she was awoken at approximately 4 a.m. by what she stated sounded like Gonzalez playing with her dog in one of the upstairs bedrooms, which were located on the third floor. A short time later, Dylan said she heard who she thought was Gonzalez say something to the effect of, "There's someone here." A review of records obtained from a forensic download of Kernodle's phone showed this could have also been Kernodle, as her cellular phone indicated she was likely awake and using the TikTok app at approximately 4:12 a.m. Dylan stated she looked out of her bedroom but did not see anything when she heard the comment about someone being in the house. Dylan stated she opened her door a second time when she heard what she thought was crying coming from Kernodle's room. Dylan then said she heard a male voice say something to the effect of, "It's okay, I'm going to help you." Now that sounds similar to what Dylan said in her statement from a short glance, but if you pay close attention, you'll see the state's sleight of hand. Dylan never said she was awoken by what sounded like Gonzalez playing with her dog in one of the upstairs bedrooms. Never once did Dylan say this in all three of her statements. All three of her statements, she said that Gonzalez was playing with Murphy in the living room. She walked upstairs, screamed, "There's someone here," ran back downstairs. Now, the state took it upon themselves to add in that Gonzalez was playing in one of the upstairs bedrooms with her dog, and that's what Dylan heard. Why did they do that? Because they knew that it did not match their story. And then it says a short time later, Dylan said she heard who she thought was Gonzalez say something to the effect of, "There's someone here." Never once did Dylan say a short time later she said that. In all three statements, Dylan said she heard Kaylee in the living room, walk up the stairs, scream, say "There's someone here," then run back down the stairs. Never did she say a short time later. Also, Dylan stated she opened her door for a second time when she heard what she thought was crying coming from Kernodle's room. Never once did Dylan say that she heard crying come from Kernodle's bedroom. All three times she said she thought what she heard was crying coming from the bathroom. And all 3 times she said that she thought it was Kaylee crying. The state had to change Dylan's statements to match their theory of events. So, when you look at the clues from Dylan's statements matched up with what the state alleges, here's what we actually find. And you see, you've got to pay close attention or you'd miss this altogether. The state says that Dylan said she was awoken at 4 a.m. to what she heard sounded like Kaylee in one of the upstairs bedrooms playing with her dog. What Dylan actually said was she was awoken sometime between 4 and 4:20. They left out the 4:20. She said that she heard Kaylee in the living room playing with Murphy. They took it out all together, put her upstairs. Dylan says Kaylee goes upstairs with Murphy and screams, "There's someone here." They took Kaylee going upstairs out all together. She says Kaylee ran back down the stairs and Murphy starts barking. They took that out all together. Never once Murphy barking anywhere. Never once Kaylee running back down the stairs. Murphy goes out the slider and continues barking. They left it out altogether. Never once does the state put that she heard Kaylee crying. They left it out altogether and alluded it could be Xana because she was awake playing on her TikTok app. The only thing in all the clues, the consistent statements that Dylan made in all 3 interviews that the law enforcement put into the proper context was she heard a man's voice say, "It's okay, I'm going to help you." So based on the clues in the case, from the statement of the only witness in the case that was very consistent across all 3 of her statements, law enforcement's narrative omitted 90%. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 clues. They omitted 6 of them out of the 7 and altered them. 6 out of 7. That's about 88%, y'all, in my humble opinion, doing quick math. Now we have the loud thud that was heard at 4:17. And the reason that those sounds at 4:17 are not only relevant due to the time frame of when these things are taking place, but the fact that they're so prevalent shows you the significance of them. Because this camera, when you really dive in, picks up sounds in the neighborhood very well that are outside the residences in the neighborhood. The screams that you hear are coming from people that are outside of the residences. You will not hear screams inside the residence unless they are extremely loud. You wouldn't hear those loud thuds unless they were extremely loud, which is why I suspect that was a gunshot at 4:17. But you will hear everything outside of the residences extremely well. And that's why when you hear Murphy start barking at an exact time, it's a clear indication that Murphy was probably barking inside the house before that, but as he runs out of the house, you can hear him clearly, which is what law enforcement determined as well. Unfortunately for them, it doesn't match up to the evidence of their narrative. But here's an example. Then the fact that Murphy starts barking loudly directly after that loud thud, maybe just a few seconds later, and he doesn't stop barking for a long time. Now we know, based on this police report, Lawrence Mowry, and he actually wrote this report on December 22nd, 2022, and he's discussing what took place, coincidentally, for the first time in any of his reports on December 22nd, 2022. Let's put it in context. They got Brian Kohberger's name on December 19th. This is 3 days later. And it says that Lawrence Mowry was tasked with reinstalling the exterior camera, known as the light bulb camera, at 1112 King Road to capture some comparison video and audio. He contacted one of the tenants who gave him permission to access her residence and conduct the recording. And then he goes on to talk about how he broke the thing in their socket. But this is what they were trying to prove, basically, with their comparison. He was able to monitor the camera using the HomeEye Pro app on his phone. Corporal Brett Payne was able to drive a white-colored vehicle into the view of the camera, but Sergeant Dustin Blaker parked a vehicle near the residence and closed the doors and trunk on a vehicle for audio comparison. We'll talk about that in another video. But finally, a canine unit from Lewis County Sheriff's Office was utilized to capture barking audio comparison from the residents. So they brought in a canine unit and conducted comparison videos with the 1112 light bulb camera of dogs barking both inside and outside of the residence to determine if it was Murphy barking outside at 417. Now, here's what people have to understand as it relates to Murphy, is the defense has never questioned whether or not the dog barking was Murphy. In fact, they conceded that it was Murphy. And we know this from their arguments on Franks. Defendant contends that Detective Payne failed to include 3 allegedly important pieces of information pertaining to the dog. So what the defense is pointing out is that the state did these tests and they omitted all of this information that they got from their own comparison. But one was the dog heard on the security camera continued to bark for 30 minutes after the suspect left. That Detective Payne conducted a test to determine that the dog was likely outside while barking, and that Murphy was found without any blood on him, even though the bedroom doors were open where the descendants were found. The decedents were found. According to defendant, this omitted information would have revealed that whoever was in the house brought the dog back inside after the suspect vehicle left. Their contention was never it wasn't Murphy, that Murphy wasn't outside barking at the time. Their contention was the state tried to hide all of it. Now again, going back to the state's case, what did they say? They said at approximately 417, a security camera located at 1112 King Road, a residence immediately to the northwest of 1122 King Road, picked up distorted audio of what sounded like voices or a whimper followed by a thud. A dog can also be heard barking numerous times starting at 4:17 a.m. The security camera is less than 50 feet from the west wall of Kernodle's bedroom. A dog can also be heard barking numerous times starting at 4:17 a.m. That's all they said. They never said the dog was likely outside as it was barking, as tests have shown. Why would they not say that? Because they know that if Murphy is outside barking like they determined, then it goes against all of the evidence in the witness's statement, and their theory cannot work with Murphy outside barking. They would also have to explain how Murphy got back inside. So far, Dylan's statements are absolutely ignored in the state's theory. The loud thud heard at 417, it's in the state's theory. We can give them a star there, but Murphy starting barking at 417 and going outside as you hear him barking is eliminated because the state's theory doesn't match the evidence. Next is Bethany's statement of hearing a firecracker and seeing a spark. The next clue that must be accounted for is the statement from Bethany. Hearing a firecracker and seeing a spark, which then prompted her to make a phone call to Dylan shortly after.
And then the next thing I remember, I woke up because I heard like a firecracker type noise. Then I saw like a little sparkler or something under the door. And then it like kind of went out. And then it's all like, I don't know, I was still half asleep and still pretty, I don't know, tipsy, I'd say. And then I just didn't really know what was happening. And then I remember either called me or I called them.
I may mention that this account from Bethany doesn't appear in the probable cause affidavit whatsoever. In fact, nothing about anything Bethany says is in this probable cause affidavit anywhere. Just forensic downloads of records from her phone is included anywhere in this account. Why is what she said that she heard and seen not included in the state's account of what took place? And it's very simple, because the state's case is that one man committed the crime inside of 2 to 4 minutes, and that one man came through the back slider, went upstairs, attacked 2 individuals, came downstairs, attacked 2 more individuals, and then went back out the slider. Bethany being on the bottom floor, not the second or third floor, and hearing and actually seeing things totally cannot be accounted for in the state's version of events. So they omitted them altogether. The exculpatory information from Bethany is the fact that she heard a firecracker and she saw a spark. If you're on the first floor in Bethany's room and you see a spark under your door, then something must be taking place on the first floor. The state's version of events do not include the first floor. It cannot be ignored that the exculpatory evidence from Bethany is her statements about hearing the firecracker and seeing the spark, because it goes completely against the state's narrative of the case and proves the state's case is wrong, because that piece of evidence is not accounted for, along with all the other evidence they don't account for in their version. So in essence, the state's case has already fell apart with the first 4 pieces of evidence that they gathered from the scene. They didn't follow anything in the witness's statement about the events that took place. They did provide the evidence of the loud thud, but then they omitted all the evidence that they did themselves, comparing that Murphy was outside barking. And then they omitted Bethany's statements altogether because it certainly doesn't fit anything in their scenario. Then we must account for the next clue, which is set in stone. Bethany calls Dylan at 4:19:07 to say that she thought she heard something, followed by Dylan returning a call to Bethany at 4:20:20 and saying that she saw a man in a mask. This has to be taken into account. We also have to take into account the forensic results of the crime scene. Every piece of evidence we're discussing has to work. It all has to be accounted for. We know that Kaylee, 70% of her DNA, 30% of Maddie's DNA is on the door to Maddie's room on the 3rd floor. We know that 100% of Kaylee's blood, DNA, was found on the pong table in the living room. And we know 3 different samples forming a triangle on the stairs between the 1st and 2nd floor are all 90% Kaylee's DNA with 10% Maddie's DNA. And those are facts, cold, hard facts. And then finally, the last sample is 100% Kaylee on that same door going into Maddie's room. Has to be accounted for. Maddie has to be accounted for. The only sample outside of where she was unalived is right on the half wall between the switchback stairs, going from the 3rd to the 2nd floor. 100% Maddie, no mixture. Has to be accounted for. Xana and Ethan. The only sample of Ethan outside of where he was unalived is 1 spot of blood that was only identifiable as Ethan's. Xana had 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 samples outside of where she was unalived that were tested, and everyone came back 100% Xana, no mixture of blood. And it's clear that it starts here at the wine cabinet table, and then it follows a path right back into where they found her the next day. Has to be accounted for. No other samples tested for Xana outside of that, or Ethan. And the last thing we've got to account for is injuries to the victims as well. And y'all know that I have already been down this road, and I've already identified so much as it relates to this. And we know that Maddie, with all of her wounds that we accounted for, thanks to more released information from the state, she had over 17 wounds. 17 plus. Who knows how many really? But over 17 wounds. We got to account for those. Ethan had over 9 wounds in very specific areas that would have taken Ethan out pretty quick. Oh, but still over 9 wounds. Then we have over 50 wounds on Xana, the most wounds of any of the victims in the atrocity. I hear a lot of people say Kaylee got it the worst. I would actually beg to differ. Xana got it the worst. And then there is Kaylee, who by no means had it easy. Kaylee had over 30 plus wounds, and likely from multiple weapons. The only victim that we know of that has been said to have been attacked with multiple weapons. Also, we have to account for the fact that Kaylee likely had post-mortem wounds, meaning some of her wounds were after she had passed away. None of the other victims have been reported to have post-mortem wounds, only Kaylee.
You know, she did get a full list of wounds, and I think the presumption initially was that that a lot of these wounds came because Kaylee was fighting back against Brian Kohberger. And it seems now that may not be the case. Some of the wounds, and it's sort of just like disgusting to talk about, but when she says experimental, some of these wounds may have been Brian Kohberger just, you know, stabbing in places and just almost like experimenting in a way, and some even after Kaylee was already dead.
Then we have to account for the weapons used in the attack that has been clearly laid out by not only the investigators in the case, but also the prosecutor in the case, Bill Thompson.
Kaylee, in the documents that just became public, there was a preliminary autopsy report that said she was stabbed over 20 times. Mr. Gonsalves said and we haven't seen the final autopsy, but he has said she was stabbed, Kaylee, over 30 times. Do you know the amount of times she was stabbed?
We do. We know the exact amount of times that every one of them was stabbed, and it's not something that we would speak about for the privacy of the families. But I can tell you, we've met with families, and his information that he has is very accurate.
Well, we know because of the public documents her face was unrecognizable. And then the concept of, okay, a second weapon. Where do you stand on that to set the record straight?
Yeah, where do you stand on that?
Yeah, we believe that there was one primary weapon. The same knife was used to kill all four. As has been reported, and I think the family has spoke to this, Kaylee was struck in the face, and we don't know what caused the marks that were left by it.
Do you believe that it was just the one knife?
I also think it is possible that he had another weapon of some type. I don't know if it was a blunt force weapon or something. I think that it is likely that he had more than one weapon with him.
So according to the investigator in the case and the lead prosecutor, they both acknowledged that at the very least 2 weapons were used. One likely a knife, the other some type of blunt force object. Y'all know that my opinion of the blunt force object is the butt of a gun. And we'll stick to the clues though, because those have to be accounted for as well. Now, every clue that I just went over was not Pav making up something. It was all straight facts taken from all of the records in this case surrounding this event. There is nothing else that I can pull as far as a clue to what happened in this event other than what I've just discussed with you. And we're going to go through and systematically discuss each and every one and eliminate all possibilities. And the only thing we'll have left is the truth. And when I get to the truth, I think you'll understand what I mean. But one thing's for certain, the state's case of one assailant, Brian Kohberger, committing this crime based on the evidence that they gathered throughout the investigation and their determination of he did all of this in 2 to 4 minutes has already been disproven. They didn't follow 88% of the accounts of their only witness in the case, and they omitted them from the record. They didn't follow their own testing of Murphy barking outside the residence at 417 and omitted it from the record because it didn't match their theory. They completely omitted Bethany's statements altogether, especially the firecracker and the spark, omitting it from their record altogether. The forensic results of the crime scene prove that their theory cannot be true. The injuries to the victims prove their theory cannot be true. Their own admission of post-mortem wounds on Kaylee goes against all of the evidence that they have presented in their theory. And the fact that they acknowledge that more than one weapon was used in the attack goes against all of the evidence in the case that they implied in their theory. One thing is for certain, based on their own evidence that they collected, their own tests that they conducted, their theory cannot be true. Between 4 and 4:16, all assailants are in place. Kaylee is in the living room, playing with Murphy, listening to music, just like Dylan says.
4 to 4:20.
So you awakened at somewhere between 4 and 4:20.
Around 4 to 4:20, woke up out of nowhere. I heard her playing music.
How do you know it was her? I guess I should ask that.
It's because I heard her voice, and she's probably singing.
And the reason I say that you can take certain aspects and certain statements by certain people, and you can determine if they are true or not, if their statements can be corroborated by other evidence. The key here is corroboration. What I'm about to show you is I can corroborate Dylan's statements, Bethany's statements, with all the other evidence to determine the truthfulness of these particular statements. And here's what I mean. She says that between 4 and 4:20, Kaylee is in the living room with Murphy, singing and dancing. I'm going to corroborate that through these findings. So the assailant comes through Kaylee's room after entering through the slider on the 3rd floor. He then makes his way to Maddie's room. Let's just say, for theory's sake, that between Dylan's contact that she put in her phone at 3:51 and 4:15, that I believe it is right now, that Dylan fell back asleep. Now, why would she wake up out of nowhere? Because Maddie's room is directly above Dylan's room. If the assailant enters Maddie's room and begins attacking Maddie, that noise likely would have awoken Dylan. Like she said, she woke up out of nowhere. But what does she hear? She hears Kaylee in the living room with Murphy singing and dancing. The assailant is in Maddie's room attacking Maddie at this point. Now, it's possible that Kaylee heard something as well, or maybe she was just going to bed, but she walks upstairs with Murphy, and as she makes it all the way up the stairs, maybe she begins to go to her room and hear something, or maybe she's just walking directly towards the noise that she hears. And she heads to Maddie's room and sees an assailant and screams, "There's someone here," turns around, and just like Dylan says, she runs down the stairs screaming, "There's someone here," as fast as she can.
I knew for sure it was her when she walked upstairs and she said someone's here. That's how I knew for sure that it was Kaylee. She walked up the stairs normal, wasn't weird or anything.
So she shouted out to you, "Somebody's here"?
Not to me. I don't know if she knew I was awake, but she walked up the stairs with Murphy. I think she got to almost about the top of the stairs just by how many stomps there was. And she said someone was here frantically. From what I remember, I think she ran down the stairs pretty fast and then it just stopped.
And again, following the statements and the clues, Kaylee goes upstairs with Murphy, screams, "There's someone here." Kaylee runs back down the stairs. Murphy starts barking. The assailant that was attacking Maddie now chases Kaylee downstairs. And because he has Maddie's blood on him, at the switchback right here of the stairs, he wipes the stairs with Maddie's blood. Remember all of the evidence that must be taken into account. One of them, the main piece of evidence, is the forensic results of the crime scene. We know that the only tested sample of blood outside of where Maddie was attacked is on the switchback stairs going down from the 3rd floor to the 2nd floor. There is a blood sample that tested 100% only Maddie's DNA. No cross-contamination between victims. As the assailant chases Kaylee down the stairs, he rubs the half wall at the switchback as he chases her down. At this time, Xana, in her room, hears the commotion and starts to come out to see what's going on. Right as 2 assailants come barreling through the slider, through the kitchen, into the living room where they attack Xana at the bar cart, and the other one goes in and attacks Ethan. I believe this is easily proven from the fact that there are 0 tested samples for Xana nor Ethan having any blood outside of this area on the second floor, and none of their blood that was tested was cross-contaminated with either Maddie nor Kaylee's blood nor each other's. All of the cast-off samples tested 100% for each victim. Ethan had a small mixture, too small for them to even determine who the other mixture in there was. That coinciding with the results of wounds on the victims tell us that Xana, with 50 plus wounds, had one attacker with a prolonged attack, but Ethan, with 9 in very vital areas, had a completely separate attacker that was attacking him and dispatched him very quickly. Kaylee continues to run, trying to make it to the front door. She makes it to the stairs where she is stopped by someone on the bottom floor firing off a firearm.
And then the next thing I remember, I woke up because I heard like a firecracker type noise. And then I saw like a little sparkler or something under the door.
The firecracker.
Okay, so it could have been a pistol and roll. Okay, so it could have been a pistol and roll. Okay, so it could have been a pistol and roll.
So search one right now.
Okay.
And then the last calls for you, this is defense right after it happens. So at 4:21, 4:22, 4:30, she made these phone calls immediately after the bang.
Remember, if you're truly going to solve something, all relevant evidence must be corroborated and must be accounted for. Bethany's statement of hearing the firecracker and seeing the spark under her door on the first floor has to be in account in the scenario. That one is corroborated and verified now. But it's the physical evidence that proves the scenario and brings it all together that they can't hide, they can't fake. Kaylee has blood on the pong table that tested 100% Kaylee's blood. Impossible for Kaylee's blood to be on the pong table unless Kaylee made it to the living room before she's attacked, or else it would have Maddie's blood mixed in with Kaylee's blood. And then you cannot deny that with 12 samples, separate samples of blood taken in this area of the stairs between the first and second floor, and 3 of those samples that were tested for Kaylee, 90% of her DNA, 89% of her DNA, with a cross-contamination of 11% of Maddie's DNA in these 3 samples, proves that the person that chased her attacked her right here after the shot that stopped her. But the person that shot on the bottom floor came up with the butt of the gun and also attacked Kaylee. And we know it happened fast with 2 different attackers because there was no DNA under Kaylee's fingernails from other assailants, unlike all the other 3 victims.
Are the marks from a knife?
No. No.
So the reality is the extent of what was done to her may be a mystery forever.
Yeah, it may be.
This is the part that brings it all together. As this is taking place, Murphy runs out the left open slider in the kitchen by the 2 assailants that came through the kitchen slider.
I think he left the house. When sounds get more distant and you can hear them getting more distant. That's what I thought I heard, and I think he went out of the house, out the back door.
Our burglar bursts in. Michelle puts on a great performance as he pretends to assault her. She screams for Perry. So what does Perry do? Does she jump in to save her? Look, she heads for the door. Michelle is left alone to defend herself. Look, she heads for the door. Look, she heads for the door.
You hear muffled screams as they're running downstairs. Here's the shot. A few more muffled screams, and then Murphy finally makes it outside. And when I consider this, it said that Murphy continued to bark for 30 minutes. We hear a dog barking for 30 minutes on the 1112 camera. Considering Murphy stays both here and over here with Jack D, the proximity between this back door where we hear him barking and this parking lot right here, very close. If he's out for an extended period of time, I think we would expect to see him roaming around. And I think we do. And I think Sunshine for All did an amazing job with taking Jules's video and finding this at 6:17. This would be less than 2 hours later. And at first when I seen this, I said, well, I guess that could be a cat. But now I'm fairly positive that that is actually Murphy. And that's exactly where I would expect to see Murphy if he was outside roaming around. And I think the defense team missed this, and this is pretty huge. And the reason I'm certain that's Murphy is she found him again at 6:48. And the Kohberger defense team believes somebody put him back in the house before the 911 call, and I agree with them. And that's no doubt in my mind, Murphy. So Murphy goes out the slider and continues barking. There's no doubt in my mind that's corroborated now, which corroborates that account. Loud thud at 4:17, verified, corroborated, accounted for. Murphy starts barking at 4:17. Verified, corroborated, and accounted for, in my opinion. Bethany's statement of a firecracker and spark. Verified, corroborated, and accounted for. What do we have left? We've already gone through most of the forensic results, the injuries to the victims. We do still have post-mortem wounds on Kaylee, and I believe we've already discussed the weapons used to attack Kaylee. However, there's one piece left. Kaylee wasn't found right here. So that means the assailants, and I believe in an effort to stage the crime to throw off investigators, took Kaylee up to Maddie's room, placed her in the bed, and then committed post-mortem wounds to make it look as if she was attacked next to Maddie. And there is evidence to verify that. As the assailants brought Kaylee back up to place her in bed with Maddie, they must have rubbed the door, and Kaylee got some blood on the door because that sample was tested with no cross-contamination from any other victim. It came back 100% Kaylee. Just so happened to be on a door where a likely bump into the door while carrying Kaylee would occur. Then once Kaylee was placed back in the bed with Maddie to continue the staging of the crime, they committed post-mortem wounds on Kaylee, and it was the same assailant that had attacked Maddie. And we know that because there was another cast-off sample that was tested that was 70% Kaylee and 30% Maddie's blood. So the forensic results of the crime scene all have to match, and they do. Injuries to the victims, they all have to match, and they do. The fact that Kaylee's the only one that's said to have had post-mortem wounds has to be accounted for, and it is. And Kaylee's the only one that is said to have multiple weapons used against her in the attack. We now can account for all of it. And I believe it's the calls from Bethany to Dylan at 4:19:07 saying that she heard something.
Firecracker.
Okay, so it could have been a pistol involved. Okay, so it could have been a pistol involved. Okay, so it could have been a pistol involved.
So search warrant right now.
Okay.
And then the last calls here, this is defense right after it happens, right after it happens, right after it happens.
And then the call back from Dylan to Bethany at 4:20:20 and saying that she had seen a man in a mask tells us that this crime all took place between 4:15 and 4:20. Now, I believe that if you were to take all the evidence that we just discussed and all the clues and not just go, I don't believe them, and then make up a bunch of other stuff, but actually take them into consideration and corroborate one to the other, you'll find that they corroborate themselves. All the evidence in the case around this scenario corroborates itself. And it not only corroborates itself, it backs up itself with the forensic reports and the injuries to the victims, as well as the audio and video, as well as the statements. It all comes together. I challenge anybody to be able to go through all that evidence and come up with a different scenario than 4 perpetrators committing the crime if they truly take into account all the evidence and don't just ignore some of it or wish it away. Now, you have to do that and separate everything else from your mind. You have to separate the 8-hour delay to the 911 call, because that has nothing to do with the physical evidence around the scene of the crime. Now, we all know now that at 4:29, that black Explorer pulls into the driveway. I think Lana the other night did an amazing job going through and showing that Hunter said in his statement he was in bed by 10. Maisie said she was in bed by 10. So the defense team, and I know for a fact that the defense team was going to argue that the prosecution, the state's timeline for the atrocity was not going to be between 4:15 and 4:20. I know for a fact they weren't. They certainly weren't going to make it earlier, though. If you watch the hearing and you read the court documents, you'll find that the defense team for Brian Kohberger was going to try to argue that the crime took place after 4:20, because they knew that that vehicle pulled in at 4:29. If the only 3 people that drive it are Maisie, Hunter, and Ethan, and Maisie's got a report stating that she was in bed by 10 as well as Hunter, then that would have only left Ethan to be driving that Ford Explorer, probably with Xana. That means the defense team was going to argue that this crime happened then, and they would have had them over a barrel, because unless Hunter or Maisie came in and actually told the truth, we think, then there would be no way for the state to explain it otherwise. So things like this tell me that we are missing something big. There is a reason that we haven't heard a whole lot about this case, except for what's been released through the police reports and the forensics. We haven't heard anything from any of the experts of the defense. We haven't heard anything from their attorneys, and there's still a lot of documents that are sealed. I got to believe they're all sealed for a reason. This thing is far from over. There's nothing, I can't find anything that tells me this thing's over, y'all. But anyways, when you look at the advantageous things that the defense had in its back pocket, it is unbelievably mind-blowing. Unbelievably mind-blowing. But whatever happened after 4:20, that's for a whole nother video. But there is nobody that can tell me now that this thing happened at 2:26 and 1:45 and 3 o'clock, because I've seen it. I've broke it apart. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. It'll be very difficult for anybody to convince me that everything that I discussed in this video isn't 1,000% accurate. Watch it 10 times if you need to truly understand what I've covered in this video, because if you do and you finally see what I see, I promise you, you can't unsee it. Please like and subscribe to this channel. Post your comments, your thoughts, your criticisms, and until next time, Pavarotti's out.